Hi, everyone. Welcome. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you also to all of the people who are watching from the comfort of their living rooms. Sounds pretty nice right now. I know there's a lot of you joining us virtually, so thank you. My name is Wolfe, and I'm the Andrea and John C. Deane Family Chief Curator and Associate Director here at the museum. And on behalf of all of us on staff, as well as our CEO, David Walker, who's here with us tonight, thank you so much for joining us and helping us to celebrate our 90th anniversary. What an amazing, I can't think of a better way to celebrate our 90 years than to look back at the founding of the museum and to celebrate with the exhibition that we put together upstairs on the Lorenzo Latimer and the Latimer School and the Latimer Club. So first I want to acknowledge, we're a little bit ahead of ourselves, acknowledge all of the sponsors of the exhibition. There are far too many to mention, but here they are listed on the screen, and thank them not just for their support of the exhibition, but really for, I think, their enthusiastic support of the institution's 90th anniversary. So we appreciate all of you. I would also like to acknowledge my co-curator, partner in crime, Jack Bacon, who is here with us tonight. Where are you, Jack? There's Jack in the second row. If there's Nevada art to be found in Nevada, he knows where it is. So you can't do a show like this without him. And I just want to also acknowledge and congratulate him on this amazing publication. Over 250 so pages that he published through his imprint, Jack Bacon Publishing and Company. It's available in our shop if you don't have it already. So Jack will be speaking on December 9th, a little bit of a different talk. I'm going to handle more of the history, and he's going to talk more about the Latimer Club and the Latimer School. So don't miss that talk a couple months from now. I'd also like to acknowledge someone pretty special to the two of us and to our museum, Alfred Harrison, who's a longtime scholar of California art, 19th century California art, who's not with us tonight, but I believe hopefully watching from his home in Berkeley, California. Alfred's a longtime scholar on Lorenzo Latimer, has always been a champion of his work. And as a result of this amazing partnership with him and his contribution of an essay to the book, he has recently donated his entire Latimer research archive, as well as his entire California art library, numbering over 3,000 volumes, to the Center for Art and Environment. So thank you, Alfred. A couple more people to acknowledge. I just want to celebrate what the museum celebrates 90 years tonight, but the Latimer Art Club celebrates 100 years. And I know that many of their members are here and were very helpful to not only our exhibition, but the exhibition of the contemporary Latimer Art Club members who are on view in the Wayne Prim Theater Gallery. So raise your hand if you're in the Latimer Art Club. I know there's many of you. Thank you. Congratulations. And I would also like to thank many of the descendants of the original Latimer Art Club founding members who are watching from far afield, I think Michigan, San Diego, all over the Minnesota, all over the country, who've dug through their old family history and scrapbooks to give us great photos and stories of the founding women of the Latimer Art Club. And finally, there's many, many lenders in the audience who have shared their paintings from their private collections with us. So I'd like to acknowledge all of them as well. So thank you. So my talk is about 45 to 50 minutes tonight. Because we're doing this hybrid, I probably won't take Q&A at the end, but I'll be here afterwards if you have any questions. So I think we will get started. From 1920 to the early 1930s, Nevada experienced a tremendous period of civic growth as the state's identity shifted from one defined by its history of mining and ranching to another shaped by the growing divorce and gambling industries. Civic leaders sought to enhance the region's cultural sophistication by establishing amenities such as parks, libraries, and an art gallery. In Reno, civic and cultural growth was modeled partially on patterns borrowed from San Francisco, a city that had rebuilt its own cultural infrastructure only a couple of decades earlier following the 1906 earthquake and fire. Part of this cultural revitalization effort in Reno included the 1927 Transcontinental Highways Exposition that was organized to mark the completion of the Lincoln Highway that stretched from San Francisco to New York City. With a master plan designed by the same landscape architect, Donald McLean, who was responsible for the layout of the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, Reno's 1927 exposition was a tremendous undertaking for city organizers. The exposition included temporary and permanent structures in Idlewild Park near the Truckee River, including pavilions dedicated to Nevada's industries. If you've ever seen the California building in Idlewild Park, this is the only remaining structure from the exposition. The revitalization efforts also stretched beyond Idlewild to include construction of a new Nevada State building designed in 1925 by Frederick DeLongchamps and George Ferris for Pounding Park in downtown Reno. Although Reno's state building was highly restrained in its architectural detailing, it was DeLongchamps who had also been the architect behind the Nevada Pavilion at the San Francisco Panama Pacific Exposition. And he, more than anyone, recognized the potential for art and architecture to drive civic and cultural growth. The Reno Exposition heralded not only the city's arrival as a travel destination, but also crystallized the notion that Reno could envision its own cultural future. When it came to the visual arts, however, in contrast to the San Francisco Bay Area or urban cities in the northeastern United States, Northern Nevada lacked a wealthy, Gilded Age philanthropist to donate his or her art collection to the community or to build an art museum cementing that legacy. By the 1920s, most of the private wealth derived from Nevada's Comstock Lode and subsequent railroad development had already made its way to the San Francisco Bay Area and to other cities further afield, rather than being invested in cultural amenities here in the region. The absence of an elite benefactor really opened the door for a grassroots group of women artists to establish the city's first community art gallery. After the passage of the 19th Amendment to guarantee women's suffrage in 1920, women became increasingly involved and committed to civic and social causes. In 1921, only a year after gaining the right to vote, this small group of Northern Nevada women founded the Latimer Art Club. Their namesake was Lorenzo P. Latimer. You can see him tucked in there on the right-hand side. Their longtime painting instructor who first visited Reno in 1916 and who made subsequent trips from his home in the San Francisco Bay Area to teach outdoor painting workshops in the Sierra and Northern Nevada. Among the club's earliest active members were women from Nevada pioneer families, born in places like Tuscarora, Virginia City, Carson City, and others who'd moved to Reno as young adults. At least a couple of them were proud art teachers in Nevada public schools. The Latimer Art Club held business meetings, luncheons, and events, and also adopted a rugged outdoor workshop component that set them apart from other social organizations. Recognized as the first arts organization in Nevada, the Latimer Art Club gained further legitimacy through its affiliation with the women's federated clubs. These clubs, women's clubs essentially, were part of a wave of progressive women's clubs organized across America in the 1920s by middle-class women who aimed to improve their communities. Beginning in 1921, the Latimer Art Club met for regular workshops and critiques, organized exhibitions throughout Reno, hosted education programs on art appreciation, and facilitated many, many community-wide gatherings that were focused on the visual arts specifically. Looking back today, 100 years later, it appears this group was pretty much already performing the perfunctory tasks of a museum staff, even though they did not have a building or a collection of their own. In December of 1926, and again in the summer of 1927, the Latimer Art Club was invited by Nevada's then Governor James Scrugham to organize 2 exhibitions at the new Nevada State Building on the occasion of the 1927 Exposition. This was a really big deal for the club. Although modernism had already held sway in many of the nation's largest urban centers by this time, the Latimer Art Club's landscape paintings of regional scenes were enthusiastically received and celebrated as examples of Nevada's homegrown talent. A relentless civic booster, Scrugham regularly encouraged the Latimer Art Club's activities. He even suggested that they need look no further than their own backyard for inspiring artistic subject matter. He once said, Reno as an art center may seem like a novel idea, but the suggestion has great merit. A score of other places not so favorably situated have enormously benefited by the addition of artists. Some in our community, referring here to the Latimer Art Club, have made a splendid start in cultivating an appreciation of the things of beauty which lie at our doors. The governor's message resonated with Latimer Art Club members who had long been mentored by their teacher, Lorenzo Latimer, to paint the natural beauty of the desert and the mountains where they lived. Go abroad and study if you can and will, Latimer encouraged, but return to your birthplace to do your life work. You can never feel any other inspiration like that of home. You will paint with a deeper feeling than in any other spot. In 1931, the increasingly active Latimer Art Club was tapped by the visionary University of Nevada professor, Dr. James E. Church, a highly regarded classicist, scientist, art historian, and mountaineer, to join a local coalition dedicated to establishing a community art gallery. In July 1931, the coalition formally incorporated as the Nevada Art Gallery. Its primary intent was to, quote, establish a center for viewing the beauty of nature and the art of man. News of these plans circulated widely in newspapers throughout the United States, with headlines that subtly mocked their efforts. Reno goes highbrow, builds art gallery, stories read. The city known the world over as the home of the gambler and the divorcee is going highbrow. And I'm telling you, this article appeared in probably 50 newspapers across the country. It's pretty amazing. After all, Nevada had already made headlines earlier the same year when the state's legislature voted to legalize gambling and loosen divorce and marriage restrictions in order to increase tourism and to counteract the worsening effects of the Great Depression. It is within this historical context and in this spirit of civic engagement that the humble Latimer Art Club helped to establish the Nevada Art Gallery and began the organization's long journey toward becoming the Nevada Museum of Art that we know today. So, we begin with Lorenzo Latimer. As an institution, the Nevada Museum of Art has not typically given him a lot of credit when it comes to our founding story, but what I hope to convey tonight is that Latimer arrived on the scene in Reno at a pivotal time when the Northern Nevada region was looking for a model upon which to establish its own artistic community and civic identity. He had the ear of the Latimer Art Club, and his sophisticated experience in the development of San Francisco's art community definitely influenced and inspired their way of thinking about art and the structures and community organizations that supported it. So let's just look very briefly at his upbringing, his education, his philosophies, those things that shaped Latimer as a young man growing up in California. He was born in 1857 in Gold Hill. It's a tiny mining town in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada over near Auburn. You see that sign on the freeway for Auburn Ravine in that area. His father here on the left was Lorenzo Latimer. He was trained as an attorney in Chicago, but like many, he headed west to try his hand as a gold miner. The young Lorenzo was born in Gold Hill, but his mother died only a few months later. His father, Lorenzo Dow, remarried and moved to Sonoma, leaving his infant son in the care of another family. Shortly after that move, his second wife died. So it was in 1865, and young Lorenzo was 8 years old, and his father remarried for a third time to Sarah Rich in Sonoma County. And they called for young Lorenzo Latimer to join them. From here on, Lorenzo was lovingly reared by his stepmother with step brothers and sisters. She was a devoted member of the Church of the New Jerusalem, founded by Emanuel Swedenborg, and an active participant in the Sonoma County Women's Suffrage Association. She traveled widely to participate in regional conferences for both of those organizations. But back to Swedenborg, the new Christian denomination was influenced by the writings of the Swedish scientist. He was a philosopher, a humanist, a theologian, a very interdisciplinary thinker, and its theology emphasized the divine origin of nature and its transformational and healing power. No one could be long in Mrs. Latimer's company without finding out that she was a very firm believer in the writings of Swedenborg, her 1904 obituary affirmed. By the time Latimer reached his teens, he was well versed in Swedenborgian theology, and it would stay with him throughout his lifetime. In 1877, at the age of 19, Latimer moved to San Francisco to enroll at the California School of Design. By this time, his father had been appointed the U.S. Attorney of Northern California. Eventually, he becomes a Superior Court judge, and was living in San Francisco while also maintaining his Sonoma residence. So San Francisco at this time was fueled by the wealth of the gold rush, the Comstock Lode, the Transcontinental Railroad. San Francisco boomed in the 1870s. And the city really became the intellectual and cultural center of California. It had a major art school, it had artist studios, and a growing art market. The people had money, had more money than they needed, so they bought artworks generously, said the landscape painter William Keith, who was a nature enthusiast, a close friend of the young naturalist John Muir, and a friend of Latimer's as well. The country was young then, he said, and people could see the poetry and romance and the art that lay at their own doors. Simultaneous to this urban renaissance of the 1860s and 70s, artists like Thomas Hill, Albert Bierstadt, William Marple, and John Ross Key set a precedent for leaving the city to seek artistic inspiration in the High Sierra. Although more often than not, they visited the Sierra and then returned to their studios to finish their paintings and actually start and finish their paintings. Latimer began to venture out of his studio not long after he began his formal art studies in San Francisco. His earliest sketching trips were to picturesque locales such as the Santa Cruz Mountains and to the foggy marshlands and estuaries of the Bay Area. He painted these early watercolors in a style known as tonalism that was popular in the San Francisco Bay Area at the turn of the century. It was a style in which artists used a limited tonal color palette to convey a moody quality in their landscape scenes. Not long after Latimer graduated in 1882, he began teaching outdoor watercolor classes and continued his travels throughout California with a small following of predominantly female students. Although he never strayed long or too far from his regular sketching trips or the medium of watercolor, Latimer developed close associations with artists and organizations that aided his rise to prominence in the San Francisco art world in the 1890s. While working in his San Francisco studio, he built a reputation as an oil painter, and his reputation was buoyed by his membership in the exclusive Palette Club, as well as the San Francisco Guild of Arts and Crafts, and a market for his work steadily grew. It was thereafter that he was invited to join the faculty of his alma mater, the California School of Design, and during his tenure, he helped to move the school into the Mark Hopkins Mansion on Nob Hill. This achievement was followed by his election to the Bohemian Club in 1894. With a membership roster restricted to men, the club offered Latimer an opportunity to socialize with artists, musicians, and business leaders who celebrated the beauty of nature and the arts. Latimer began to exhibit regularly in the Bohemian Club exhibitions in San Francisco and joined in the club's annual summer excursions to the Bohemian Grove, a stand of old-growth redwood trees on the Russian River where club member and architect Bernard Baybeck eventually designed a clubhouse for the group. During this decade, Latimer's passion for painting redwoods was kindled. His depictions of the majestic trees were enthusiastically received. He also illustrated a small booklet of poetry in the redwoods, Latimer's nature-based approach to life dovetailed squarely with the philosophies of the Bohemian Club. Here's a wall of Latimer's redwood paintings that's on view in the exhibition upstairs. As California historian Kevin Starr once noted, the Bohemian Club of San Francisco, organized as they were around a blend of outdoor life, fine dining, and musical and theatrical performances, institutionalized even further this impulse to harmonize society and wilderness. Latimer's commitment to the gestalt of the period culminated in an 1898 article he penned and illustrated titled "The Redwood and the Artist" for the Overland Monthly, where he invoked the sublime qualities of redwood trees and his spiritual reasons for painting them. He wrote, "In the midst of such grandeur, such sublimity of nature, how insignificant one feels himself to be. With awe and utter helplessness, the rash artist begins the drawing even of the first line, and as he goes on, he becomes dissatisfied and discouraged. Then he stops and stares, completely at a loss to know how to proceed. Nowhere does one find such depth of feeling as in a forest of giant redwood trees. I think the Creator never intended that anyone should represent on canvas these noble trees as they really are, or he certainly would have made them simpler." Even as Latimer kept an indoor studio on Market Street in San Francisco from 1900 to 1906, the outdoors always beckoned. To supplement his artist's income, he regularly taught small workshop classes in the field, taking a special interest in his students and mentoring their progress. In 1904, Latimer's lifelong quest to find interesting subject matter led him on sketching trips into the High Sierra, including Yosemite and the vicinity of Donner Pass. His summer sojourns in the Sierra, however, were interrupted in 1906, when the earthquake and fire destroyed much of San Francisco, as well as his Market Street studio. In the wake of the devastation, with his beloved city smoldering around him, Latimer took to his easel to sketch at least 2 pictures of the ruins. This is his sketch of Grace Church, and he made another one of San Francisco City Hall. Having been deeply engaged in the city's cultural renaissance during the final decades of the last century, Latimer must have been overwhelmed to see it all go up in flames. In the years following the earthquake and fire, Bay Area residents increasingly sought solace and healing in the wilderness. The advent of the automobile made the Sierra and nearby Lake Tahoe more accessible. George Wharton James's 1915 book, Lake of the Sky, lavishly illustrated with photographs of Lake Tahoe scenery, was a popular guide for travelers. Among the more rugged destinations in the Sierra was Fallen Leaf Lake, located about a mile southwest of Lake Tahoe. At this time, William Price and his wife Bertha operated the Fallen Leaf Lodge, a rustic mountain resort catering to Bay Area visitors. Price was a graduate of Stanford University with a background in the natural sciences and an early member of the Sierra Club. Price pioneered the area around Fallen Leaf Lake in the 1890s. And of course, we all watched as the recent fire got very close to Fallen Leaf Lake and are thankful at this moment that all of this is still with us. It was Price who first invited Latimer to be a guest at his Fallen Leaf Lodge in 1914. You can see Latimer there on the horse to the right, headed up the Tamarack Trail, Desolation Valley, Desolation Wilderness today, right behind him. Latimer's commitment to working outside and his close study of nature found a kindred spirit in Price. The first year, Latimer stayed in a small cabin in front of the lodge's recreation hall near the lake's edge, just to the left of the canoe there in the center of the photograph. Upon Latimer's return to San Francisco in the fall, he was praised by a San Francisco Chronicle writer as having discovered a new source of artistic inspiration. Lorenzo P. Latimer has been following many winding paths through the Tahoe country during the past 3 months. Though that northern region has been tramped and explored by dozens of artists, Its possibilities seem not to lessen for new angles, varied tints, and atmosphere. Latimer has never been more enthusiastic than at present, and says that the area around Fallen Leaf has scarcely been touched upon by painters. Thus began Latimer's annual visits to Fallen Leaf Lake, where he produced some of his most exquisite watercolor paintings of nearby Angora Peak, Keith's Dome, and Mount Talac. And I'd just like to share that the last 4 paintings I showed to you have just been made a gift to the Nevada Museum of Art's permanent collection from the Brewery Arts Center. So. It was just a matter of time before Price invited Latimer to teach summer painting workshops at the Lodge, which were advertised in its 1915 brochure. Professor L.P. Latimer's class in drawing and painting, both in watercolor and oil, will be at the Lodge again this year. Nowhere in the mountains is there such a wealth of artistic subjects. The lakes, streams, waterfalls, mountains, forests, and above all, the wonderful color of the high Sierra atmosphere furnish compositions of exquisite beauty. Photographs show Latimer and his students shaded by parasols and painting near the shore of the lake. By the 1920s, Latimer was fully embedded in the growing resort culture of the region when Price invited him to design the Lodge's printed stationery. The new letterhead featured a sketch of Mount Talac alongside the lake's reflective surface with thunderclouds gathering in the distance, while other printed pieces included a simple drawing of a fallen alder leaf. While Latimer's contributions to the marketing campaign of the Fallen Leaf Lodge may seem relatively minor, his annual presence at Fallen Leaf Lake and the scenic paintings that he sold after returning home to San Francisco helped to fuel enthusiasm for tourism and interest in the Lake Tahoe region. In 1916, 2 young painters from Reno, Nevada, signed up to take one of Latimer's watercolor workshops at Fallen Leaf Lake. Dora Grosbeck and Nevada Wilson, who went by Neva Wilson, were both public school art teachers in northern Nevada. They took Latimer's workshop, enjoyed his teaching style, and invited him to visit Reno. Latimer obliged and soon began making regular visits to northern Nevada. After this, Latimer's annual pilgrimage became an eagerly anticipated affair. Each fall, Latimer met in Reno with a small group of women painters to teach informal watercolor classes in the field. The group noticed Latimer's experience not only as a skilled painter and nature lover, but as someone who had witnessed the tremendous growth of the San Francisco arts community from the 1870s to the 1890s, and the rebuilding of that city post-earthquake and fire. As the women began to contemplate organizing an art club in Reno, one can hear echoes of Latimer reminiscing about the nascent San Francisco art world. In remarks he made to a group of civic leaders gathered in the Bay Area in 1918, he recalled a scene that was surely inspiring to the Reno women, and they must have envisioned their own future upon hearing his words. This is what he said. Nearly a half-century has passed since the first organization for the advancement of art was founded in San Francisco. At that time, there were very few artists on this coast, but they played an important part in developing the artistic taste of the people and of their period. At first, a small club was formed, with weekly meetings at some studio. Each member was required to bring a sketch or a composition. These were criticized and a general discussion followed. These meetings were always friendly. There were no jealousies among this little band of artists, only goodwill and fellowship. As the number of artists increased, the need of a large exhibition room was felt. So they decided to form a large society that would admit men and women who were not artists. The annual exhibitions formed an important feature of the artistic and social life of the city. By the age of 64, Latimer had settled into a comfortable pattern of annual warm weather travel, teaching and painting. His summers generally commenced in his childhood home of Sonoma County in June, then included a stay at Fallen Leaf Lake during midsummer, and ended in Reno during late fall, where he was always enthusiastically welcomed. Latimer's decades-long commitment to the artists of Northern Nevada cannot be overstated. As I said earlier, he arrived on the scene at a pivotal time when the Northern Nevada region was looking for a model upon which to establish its own community and civic identity. Latimer's sophisticated experience in the development of San Francisco's art community fulfilled this need. It was a natural fit that the Latimer Art Club was drawn to a mentor whose philosophies were grounded in the direct observation of nature and who venerated the beauty of the landscape. On November 9th, 1921, a small group of women came together at the Reno home of Dora Groesbeck to officially charter the Latimer Art Club and lay the groundwork for its future activities. Groesbeck was born in Virginia City in 1884, took art classes at the College of Arts and Crafts in Berkeley, and was the head of the Sparks art department at the public schools for over 13 years. Among the other founding women were Echo Mapes Robinson, who was born in 1899 to Josephine and George Mapes. Her father was a prominent stockman, rancher, banker, and landowner. Echo had actually studied at the California School of Design in its new Mark Hopkins building right at the time when it burned down. That's when she left the Mark Hopkins and returned to Reno. Hildegard Herz was born in 1894. Her parents had immigrated from Germany to Virginia City during the Comstock and eventually opened a prominent Reno jewelry business. Hilda studied art at the University of Nevada and spent a lifetime as an artist and a world traveler. Neddy Mcdonald, an indigenous woman of full Assiniboine ancestry, was born in 1880 in northeastern Montana. She was taken from her family at a young age and sent to Carlisle Indian Boarding School before she became a school teacher, married an engineer, a Nevada engineer, and made her way to Verdi and then to Reno. And Minerva Pierce, who also attended the University of Nevada, studied art in San Francisco, became a teacher, and who was elected the Latimer Art Club's first president, elected to the presidency of the Latimer Art Club, an office that she held for many years. From the beginning, active membership in the Latimer Art Club was predicated upon one's dedication to field work and proof of prior classwork with Latimer. Meeting this requirement included completion of a course consisting of 12 lessons under his direct tutelage. Active members paid $1 in annual dues and were permitted to paint directly from Latimer's original artworks as part of their coursework during studio sessions. If you're wondering how I know all of this, the Latimer Club kept meticulous minutes from its very first day. All of them housed at UNR special collections, and I read from 1921 to 1967. So I'm leaving out a lot of details. The club began purchasing class pictures from Latimer for $10 a piece. In essence, developing a small art collection of its own. The intent of the studio practice was not to simply copy, but to glean lessons in composition, style, and color from Latimer's paintings. Latimer implored his students to develop their own artistic vision. They must avoid following the style of any master. Only when the artist paints honestly, seeing his subject through no eyes but his own, shall he paint with authority, he told his students. Be yourself and paint in your own way. I invite all of you to be the judge here whether any copying occurred. Each summer, the club organized group paint-outs throughout northern Nevada, sometimes venturing as far as the Lake Tahoe Basin or other parts of California. Field work began as soon as the weather warmed in June and lasted through the end of October, when Latimer would arrive in Reno. Favorite sites on the outskirts of Reno included Idlewild Park, Pleasant Valley, Glendale, Verdi, Pyramid Lake, Washoe Lake, Wadsworth, Genoa, Thomas Creek, Galena, Bowers Mansion, and the Frey Ranch in Fallon. Occasionally, the club traveled to Lake Tahoe to visit Fallen Leaf Lake, Carnelian Bay, and Glenbrook, seen here. This is the case when they gathered at the home of Eleanor Smith, who's the third artist from the right. Club members drove together to these painting sites, set up their easels alongside roads or in open fields, and shaded themselves with parasols. I would especially like to thank the family of Zella Conan Pearsall, the woman on the left here. She's not a founding member of the club, but a longtime member who had the foresight to keep an amazing scrapbook that we were able to borrow from her descendants, some of them who are watching virtually tonight. So thank you so much. The workshop format with Latimer served the group well, allowing members time to get to know their mentor, who always stressed the importance of lifelong art education. Paint what you see. Paint it as you see it, Latimer would say. And remember always, whoever you are, that you always have more to learn. During the 1920s, the Latimer Art Club organized many events that became annual happenings in Reno. Organizing public exhibitions was a high priority for the Latimer Art Club, who jumped at almost every opportunity to display paintings. During the club's first decade, exhibitions were held regularly at the brand new 20th Century Club building at 335 West 1st Street. The brick structure located on the Truckee River was built in 1925 to serve as the clubhouse for the Women's Federated Clubs, for which Echo Mapes Robinson had been a charter member. It still stands today. It might look familiar to you there, right by Wingfield Park. Other Latimer Club exhibitions were organized at the Chamber of Commerce rooms at the National Bank Building, as well as at the Truckee River Power Company, the Riverside Hotel Lounge, the club room of the Nevada chapter of the Eastern Star, the Methodist Church Parlor, and in many private homes throughout the Truckee Meadows. One Latimer Club associate member in particular, Charles F. Cutts, championed the activities of the Latimer Art Club and frequently offered his home and business in Carson City as a space for the club to hold exhibitions. Of course, the highlight of the club's first decade were the major exhibitions that debuted at the during the Reno Exposition in late 1926 and 1927 at the new Nevada State Building, with over 500 people at the opening reception. That gets about half a page right up in the minutes from 1927. By the late 1920s, the idea of acquiring a permanent space of their own began to dominate conversations of the Latimer Art Club. Latimer himself frequently advised the group to develop an art collection and to acquire a club room where painting sessions could be held along with meetings and exhibitions. By 1926, the search for a permanent space had begun in earnest. With a steady balance in their treasury and a reserve fund set aside as well, club members explored many different rental opportunities, from spaces in commercial and civic buildings and private homes and even barns. The Latimer Art Club closed the year of 1930, as they always had, with a board meeting on December 9th and the release of their annual report. Little did they know that in fewer than 6 months, they would be joining a community-wide effort to help establish the first art gallery in Nevada. By 1914, when Lorenzo Latimer had first visited Fallen Leaf for the first time, Dr. James Church had already penned 7 articles for the Sierra Club Bulletin detailing his mountaineering journeys into the Sierra Nevada. Among them were midwinter trips in the Sierra, which told of his snowy hikes to the summit of Mount Rose, and Mount Rose Weather Observatory, relating news of the weather station he co-founded the year prior. In 1915, Church authored Lake Tahoe in Winter for the Sierra Club Bulletin, along with a chapter in George Wharton James' Lake of the Sky. Church's passion for the Sierra had developed soon after his arrival in Reno in 1892 to accept a faculty position in the classics department at the University of Nevada. For many years, Church taught Greek, Latin, and German as a professor of classics at the university. He developed a special love for classical poetry and art history, researching and publishing widely on both topics. Church began his excursions into the Sierra in 1895, where he braved below zero temperatures and freezing wind to climb Mount Rose on the northeastern shore of the Tahoe Basin. He summited the mountain again in a midwinter trip with his wife, Florence Humphrey Church, in 1904. A year later, in 1905, Church helped co-found the Mount Rose Meteorological Observatory, which became his base for continued research into the measurement of the water content in snow and the snowpack survey he conducted annually. Now, this is a little bit later image of Church, James Church and his wife Florence conducting some of those studies. Church was sometimes asked why his research interests appeared to shift so drastically from the humanities to the sciences. He would answer, "I am not a scientist, but a humanist. It is the human side of snow that fascinates me." While Church's penchant for the Sierra was rooted in a spirit of exploration and scientific study, he also exhibited a deep appreciation for the beauty of the mountains that was grounded in his humanist approach toward experiencing nature. While Church kept a busy research and travel schedule, his wife, Florence Humphrey, became deeply involved in the women's rights movement and was a fierce advocate for suffrage in the early 1900s. Described as a champion of womankind, she was an early founder of the Nevada Federation of Women's Clubs, a lifelong member of the Reno's 20th Century Club, and a vocal advocate for women's equality. Humphrey knew many of the Latimer Art Club members and supported its affiliation with the Women's Federated Clubs. However, sadly, she died unexpectedly in 1922 at the young age of 53. James Church remained deeply committed to women's suffrage and supported the important work women were doing to improve their communities. Given this, he became an associate member of the Latimer Art Club shortly after her passing. Church began to lay the formal groundwork for a future art gallery in earnest following the 1927 Exposition in Reno. His vision would require him to build a consensus of like-minded individuals, organizations, and community groups. The future gallery's affiliation with the University of Nevada was important to him, and he always believed that an institution of higher learning should be involved in the gallery administration. Engaging the Women's Federated Clubs was also a priority, and given his deceased wife's commitment to women's suffrage, he felt such a gallery should be dedicated to the memory of noble womanhood. And I had always wondered for so many years why I would see this initial mission statement being dedicated to the memory of noble womanhood. And it's only when finally connecting up, Sarah Rich Latimer and Florence Humphrey's life did I realize that that was the reason. So in March 1931, Church requested an appearance at the board meeting of the Latimer Art Club to outline his vision for the art gallery. By this time, the 10-year-old club was deeply invested in efforts to locate a permanent studio and a meeting place. To the club's board, he presented a concept for an art gallery surrounded by beautifully landscaped gardens. The proposed location was a sloping hillside south of University Terrace, between West and Nevada streets, just north of downtown Reno. You might recognize this site because the balustrade there on the right still exists. It was built for the fledgling gallery by the WPA, and if you drive up on University Terrace, you can still see the fence, the balustrade. The water of the scenic ore ditch bisected the land, and sweeping southward views of the Sierra and Mount Rose were to be had from all corners of the property. The most pressing matter at hand, however, was that Church was in the process of acquiring a series of adjacent lots for the project and needed financial support. To help orient you, Chestnut Street is actually Arlington, and it dead ends up at what was to become Interstate 80 there. So, Church invited the Latimer Art Club to purchase a parcel as a gift for a future gallery and grounds. The club called a special meeting immediately to discuss the opportunity, and on March 17, 1931, they enthusiastically approved a payment of $350 from their treasury for the acquisition of land for a future gallery. Church himself, along with the city of Reno, also contributed funds to purchase lots, as well as 19 other property owners who donated full or partial adjacent land near the adjoining parcels. As a result of Church's successful campaign to acquire land, he drew up articles of incorporation for the Nevada Art Gallery that were ratified on June 19, 1931. The articles outlined provisions for a 9-member, not-for-profit corporation comprised of at least one representative of the Latimer Art Club, one member of the Board of Regents of the University of Nevada, and one representative from the Nevada Federation of Women's Clubs, plus a few others. James Church and the longtime art collector Charles F. Cutts were to be honored as lifetime trustees. As outlined by Church and others, the gallery would serve the following purposes. 1. To establish a center for viewing the beauty of nature and the art of man. 2. To bring art and life into closer contact. 3. To send forth beauty and idealism to the remote homes of Nevada. 4. To acquire by purchase, gift, or otherwise, real and personal property. And 5. To construct buildings. Church spent the next decade of his life working towards realization of the gallery's construction. In numerous letters to potential partners and supporters, Church outlined his broad plan for an art gallery, with a lake and winding waters in the presence of eternal hills. There will be a roof garden from which one can sit and find himself in the presence of nature, or mingle with others in the presence of the art of man. The art gallery shall not become the tomb of cold beauty, but a social hall where beauty will make life gentle. Designs for the gallery were prepared by Church's son, the architect Willis Church, and a landscaping concept prepared by Reno architect David Vey. The grounds proved to be a very important aspect of the plan, and the notion of passing through the garden to transition from everyday life to a place of beauty was important to Church, just as it was to the Latimer Art Club. In 1936, the Latimer Art Club began paying the taxes on the properties. Community members pitched in to clean and clear the grounds and began installing infrastructure. The project limped along with the support offered by individuals and elected leaders, but never gained enough fundraising traction to begin construction. The challenges wrought by the Depression and the debt carried by the organization during these early years worried Church, and progress slowed. Church did, however, take pleasure in the forward movement of a related project that operated as a satellite of the Nevada Art Gallery, beginning in 1936. The Church family, along with the family of Maud Taylor, had acquired 3 lots on Forest Service land in the Cedar Flat tract at Lake Tahoe's Carnelian Bay. On the lot in the Cedar Flat tract, Church's son Willis designed a small home with a pine tree growing through its center that was flanked by a circular terrace made from natural stone slabs. It was called the Tree House. The structure became known as the Tree House, and its design tapped into the quasi-religious nature aesthetic of the era that had been so popularized by previous generations of people like Swinburne and Latimer. The Treehouse became an active outpost of the Nevada Art Gallery and played host to small gatherings, including the Latimer Art Club, who came together to sketch on the terrace overlooking Lake Tahoe. The Treehouse enjoyed steady use for many decades, but in the end, it never formally transferred permanent ownership to the Nevada Art Gallery. During the 1930s and 40s, the Latimer Art Club patiently awaited the construction of a new art gallery and garden complex proposed for Church's University Terrace. In the meantime, they maintained their rigorous schedule of public exhibitions, social gallery gatherings, and outdoor paintouts. Plans for the gallery took many, many twists and turns. They took a collective step closer to realizing their vision, however, in 1948, when Charles Cutts, a longtime associate member of the Latimer Art Club and a founding trustee of the Nevada Art Gallery, made a change to his estate plan. Rather than leave his home and estate to the University of Nevada, as previously planned, he named the Nevada Art Gallery as the sole beneficiary. After a lifetime spent as a successful Carson City businessman, world traveler, book collector, art collector, and connoisseur, Charles Cutts died on May 7, 1949. After a legal and very public dispute between the university and the Nevada Art Gallery over his end-of-life decision to change his will, a settlement was finally reached that divided the estate equally between the two entities. The Nevada Art Gallery received Cutts' home at 643 Ralston Street, along with his collections of art, antiques, furniture, books, and approximately $63,000. Once the Nevada Art Gallery assumed possession of Cutts' Ralston Street home, the Board of Trustees and community volunteers set aside plans for the University Terrace properties. After a full remodel and many interior and exterior updates, the Nevada Art Gallery opened its doors to the public on October 15, 1950. The Latimer Art Club stepped up to organize the opening festivities, but soon assumed full responsibility for the day-to-day management of the gallery. This remained the arrangement many years into the future. Church acknowledged and accorded the Latimer Art Club the respect they deserved when he stated that, quote, "Much of what has been accomplished at the Nevada Art Gallery is due to the Latimer Club. They have all served on committees, cataloged collections, worked on the maintenance of the collections and building, arranged exhibitions, conducted workshops, classes, and arranged all but a few programs on art, history, travel, music, and many other topics. All told, the Latimer Art Club worked tirelessly to breathe life into the fledgling organization." Longtime member Hildegard Herz, who's seen here on the right, served as a volunteer historian for the gallery for almost 2 decades. She kept detailed scrapbooks summarizing the hundreds of exhibitions, programs, and lectures that the Latimer Art Club presented up until 1967. Exhibitions and public programs were never restricted to fine art exclusively, but assumed an interdisciplinary range of topics, from architecture, stained glass, and flower arranging to poetry, weather, and radioactivity. Quote, "Dr. Church recognizes no sealed compartments between the branches of fine arts and science." A newspaper article explained of the gallery's unique programmatic mission. The sheer diversity of the gallery's offerings proved to be a sound model for attracting visitors to the gallery. The Nevada Art Gallery's activities were so successful, the board of directors planned an addition to Cutts' Ralston Street home in the mid-1950s. While Church disagreed and believed the funds should instead be invested in the properties still held at University Terrace, he eventually consented. "Problems are many," he wrote in 1952, as enthusiasm for the garden and building complex he initially envisioned began to wane. The expansion of the 7th Street Freeway, known as Interstate 80, just south of the properties in 1954, disrupted the serenity of the site and severed it from the downtown corridor. On March 23, 1958, the new wing of the Nevada Art Gallery, designed by Graham Erskine and Lehman Ferris, opened to the public. A year later, the organization boasted 500 paid memberships. The Latimer Art Club assumed responsibility for rotating exhibitions in the north rooms of the Cutts House, which became known as the Latimer Rooms. Although Lorenzo Latimer had passed away in 1941, his legacy was proudly carried forth by the volunteer group that bore his name. Church remained committed to helping the Nevada Art Gallery acquire significant works by Latimer for its permanent collection, and he successfully secured a painting titled "The Last Glow" from Latimer's estate. The title of the painting is an apt metaphor for Church's unyielding efforts on behalf of the gallery, even as his health began to decline during the twilight of his own life. Having a Latimer painting for the gallery's permanent collection was an important way to cement Latimer's legacy. Latimer's son, Lorenzo Phelps Latimer, offered the painting to the Nevada Art Gallery to acknowledge how important the people of Nevada had been to his father. "I am always glad to hear from members of the Latimer Art Club, because they did more than any other group of people to honor my father and bring him so much happiness in his later years." On August 5, 1959, Dr. James Church died at the age of 90. He had served as the president of the Nevada Art Gallery's Board of Trustees for 21 years. His spirited vision to establish an art center and garden in Reno is an example of his bold willingness to take risk, and is best summed up by the postscript that he liked to add to poet Alexander Pope's well-known verse: "Fools rush in where angels fear to tread, and more often than not succeed." Churl's longtime friend, Earl Ross, assumed the leadership role of president and worked to carry forth the initiatives of the Nevada Art Gallery with great respect for Church's vision until he resigned in 1964. The newly elected president of the Nevada Art Gallery Board was Samuel Houghton, a longtime Nevada resident who was long active in civic affairs. Although the activities of the gallery continued to enjoy great popularity, Houghton felt action was needed to stabilize the institution and to increase fundraising capacity. This included asking the Latimer Art Club to join him in promoting programs and events that would increase revenue for the organization. Given that members of the club were already solely responsible for staffing 6 gallery positions in 1966, they felt they could not assume more responsibility. They also sensed a shift in philosophy away from many of Church's long-held ideals that had shaped their management of the gallery since the beginning. In 1967, Houghton established a new volunteer branch for the gallery known as the Action Group. The first newsletter stated, "Action is the live wire name selected for the group of members working to expand community interests in the Nevada Art Gallery, to extend its membership and influence, and to increase its vitality." Misunderstandings between the Latimer Art Club and the Board of Trustees came to pass over who was managing and selecting exhibitions and how the Latimer Art Club might better help contribute to the financial needs of the institution. In 1967, the Latimer Art Club felt the time had come to step back from their longtime duties and to distance themselves from the Nevada Art Gallery. They penned a letter to the Board of Trustees and stated, "We are truly sincere in hoping that everything be worked out, so that the entire membership will return to the gallery with a clear and willing mind to establish again the old feeling of being part of the gallery, of which we were the nucleus, and to help cultural advancement for all groups of the community." It was not long before the Board of Trustees amended the Articles of Incorporation, eliminating the Latimer Art Club, the University of Nevada, and the Women's Federated Clubs. Although disappointment lingered, members of the Latimer Art Club graciously stepped aside while welcoming new members and volunteers with support and enthusiasm. As they did, they channeled the philosophical wisdom of James Church by recalling the thoughtful guidance he had offered to them over the years. "People should learn to understand each other better," he would say. "The problems of the gallery are only shadows of its own healthy growing pains. And remember, institutions are the elongated shadows of individuals." Many individuals have come together over the years to help shape the course of Nevada's artistic and cultural future. The year 2021 marks 90 years since the founding of the Nevada Art Gallery and 100 years since the formation of the Latimer Art Club. From the 1920s to the late 1960s, the most influential leaders were James E. Church, Charles F. Cutts, Lorenzo P. Latimer, and members of the Latimer Art Club, who worked together to establish the first art gallery in the state of Nevada. Their passion for the organization ran deep, their work ethic never faltered, and their commitment to exploring art, nature, and the humanities through an interdisciplinary lens continues to be widely felt today. It is on this occasion that we acknowledge these individuals who laid the foundations for what is today known as the Nevada Museum of Art. Thank you. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. Thanks to everyone who's at home watching, and I'm happy to answer questions outside in the lobby this evening. So enjoy the rest of your evening and weekend. Thanks again.